We've got some recruiting updates coming off a big visit weekend leading right into National Signing Day on this episode of the Locked On Aggies podcast.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Locked On Aggies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Joey Ikes. Thanks so much for making Locked On Aggies your first listen. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And the next few days are going to be massive for college football in general, but especially massive for Jimbo Fisher and the Texas A&M Aggies. And the reason why is this Wednesday, December the 21st, is the first day of the early signing period for high school recruits. So these high school recruits who've been going through this recruiting process for the last 3-4 years, some of them, will have the opportunity to sign their national letters of intent and submit that paperwork to A&M and to the NCAA and declare officially and finally, at least for a year, now that the transfer portal is an open exercise, that they are going to be part of the Texas A&M recruiting class of 2023 and part of the Texas A&M football program for at least the next 12 months. And so it's a big time of year. And this is really the time last year when things really kicked into high gear for A&M. They were trending in a very, very good place last year around this time. And about a week before signing day, some of these big flips started happening. Evan Stewart flips, all those sorts of things start to happen. And that's when the momentum really built. And this, holy cow, look at this class A&M has put together thing really started to happen. And while I don't think we're necessarily on that track with where we're at with Texas A&M recruiting going into the year, I do think A&M is in a better spot than, we might have expected. And I think that we're looking at an opportunity to put together a really good recruiting class. And they had a really big visit weekend this past weekend where they had a ton of guys in town. Almost all of the commits for the 2023 recruiting class were in town this week on either official visits or unofficial visits. And that does include Ruben Owens, who flipped to A&M last week from Louisville. And that does include DJ Hicks and Damian Sanford and all those other guys. One guy who obviously wasn't there is Anthony Hill, who did decommit from A&M about a month ago and committed to Texas last week. So that's a guy who at this point is off the table. As it sits right now, A&M has the 15th highest ranked recruiting class in the country with only 13 commits. There's not a team above them with less than 20 commitments. There's not a team within 10 spots of them with 13 commitments. The closest one is 15 commitments, and that's Florida State, who's at 18th in the standings. So with the quality of players that A&M is including in this recruiting class at this point, if they can add 1 or 2 or 3 more, they'll get a nice little bump up in the standings, and they have a chance to wind up there in the top 10 area of the recruiting process this year, which is, and this is according to 24/7, the rankings here, which is a pretty significant achievement, considering all the ups and downs of the season. So to go through some of the things that went down over the weekend, some of the guys who were in town, and what it means for A&M recruiting, probably the biggest story is, like I said, that those guys, all those guys who committed were in town. And as far as the interviews that have come out since, the guys who are committed. Pretty much everybody comes in solid and still remains so. That includes Ruben Owens. That includes Dalton Brooks, Bravion Rogers. Those are 2 4-star defensive tackles and a 5-star running back. Defensive tackle, Samu Tamanopepe, and offensive tackle, Nikhil Bertrand, all came in really solid. As expected, they will stay that way. DJ Hicks, we know he has taken some visits to other places. He's been in Norman, Oklahoma. He's been in Eugene, Oregon. He was in Eugene last week. He apparently, according to folks who have spoken to his family, is basically locked in at this point. He's an A&M commitment. Javon Thomas, we know and have heard rumors of TCU trying to work on Javon to get him to flip. He's a 4-star cornerback from South Oak Cliff. And he, I don't know what the right word is, tossed a little fuel on the fire there because South Oak Cliff played in the Texas State Championship game this week against Port Neches Groves, a team from Southeast Texas. And apparently Javon wore TCU gloves in that game. He did say after the game, he talked to some folks about it and said that their team has a commitment or a deal or whatever, a philosophy that, especially in the playoffs, they wear gloves, the secondary does, that match the jersey of the opposing team. And you can think of all of the reasons why it might be beneficial for a defensive back to be wearing gloves that match the jersey of the other team. Port Neches Groves wears purple jerseys. TCU is purple colors. Who knows if that's really the reason why he wore those gloves, but that's at least what he said. We will see if that holds true. In terms of guys who are not committed, who are not part of the A&M class but were in town, A&M offered Temple, Texas linebacker Torian York last week. He was in town on an official visit, and he's going to announce his commitment in the next couple of days. Seems optimistic for A&M. We'll see there. Caden Jones, the offensive tackle from New Orleans, he's not going to announce for a while, but things apparently went really well on his visit. Now, Stanford commit Jaden Platt was at A&M over the weekend, and he was in Florida the week before. A lot of people don't expect him. I mean, think about all the changes going on in Stanford right now. David Shaw just retired, all that kind of stuff. We'll see how that one goes. Ole Miss quarterback commit Marcel Reed was at A&M this weekend as well. It's going to be a battle. A&M has done as well as they can there, and we will see how that turns out. Now we're going to get to Tony Mitchell, who is the biggest fish left in the pond probably for A&M at this point that we at least know about in terms of A&M working hard to get a flip there. But before I get to Tony Mitchell, I got to tell you guys about LinkedIn. We're almost to the end of the year. We're going into 2023, and every potential hire for your small business can feel like a high-stakes wager. You want to be 100% certain that you have the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Go to LinkedIn Jobs, add your job posting for free, then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. You got to finish the year strong, and you really have to start 2023 strong to give yourself the best chance to have a really great 2023. And you can do that by adding the right team member right now. It's why small businesses have rated LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions applying. Now, as we get to Tony Mitchell, and we've talked about Tony Mitchell on this podcast before. Tony Mitchell is a 5-star defensive back. Call him a safety, call him a corner. I think there's probably some flexibility there. Who is currently committed to Alabama. And there has been a lot of back and forth there on on whether Tony would wind up sticking with that commitment to Alabama. And we've talked about this before. He is from Alabama. And once he made that commitment in the summer, it was always going to be very unlikely that he makes some sort of dramatic flip during the football season or during the fall semester. But A&M has done everything they possibly can there. And based on information from a few different places, A&M feels really, really good about their chance to land Tony Mitchell. I mean, we're talking about one of the top 50 or 100 players in the entire class. One of the top 5 safety, one of the top 10 best prospects in all of Alabama. Has a chance to wind up at A&M in a class where they need some secondary help. They've got a couple of guys, Javon Thomas that we talked about earlier, Bravion Rogers. But Tony Mitchell would be a huge, huge pickup for A&M in this thing. Just like with a lot of these guys, just like with Anthony Hill, just like with several of these other players, the way the 2022 season went down for A&M hurt. We shouldn't be surprised at that at this point. We've talked about that a lot here. But we're at that point now where it's time for the recruits to go to work. It's time for the coaching staff to go to work and to close this class strong. And closing with a guy like Tony Mitchell is a massive step in the right direction. Another guy who is interesting and had some interesting developments out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, from Booker T. Washington, wide receiver Micah Tease. Now, we've talked a lot about how the A&M skill position situation in this class was leaving a lot to be desired. And Micah Tease is a 4-star wide receiver from Tulsa, has been committed to Arkansas for a while, since July. On Monday, Micah Tease decommits from Arkansas and is now uncommitted, but plans to sign in the early signing period. We're talking about a 4-star, top 10. He's classified as an athlete by 24/7. He's thought of as a wide receiver, even though he's athletic enough to play a couple of different positions, including defensive back and stuff like that. He's got burst, he's got speed, all of that kind of stuff. He's would be a perfect fit in this A&M recruiting class, and we know how much they need speed, how much they need skill position talent to go with Reuben Owens and what they already have in Evan Stewart, Moose Muhammad, and the guys that are there to play with Connor Wigman. So Micah Tease is definitely a guy to watch. Like I said, visited A&M over the weekend. Monday morning makes the formal decommitment from Arkansas. We will see if they are able to secure the flip before the end of the recruiting cycle. in terms of transfer portal players, we're going to get to the transfer portal. But first, I'm excited to tell you guys about BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football and college bowl season to basketball, college basketball, NBA basketball. We've got it all at BetOnline. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. In terms of the transfer portal, the biggest name probably who is in the transfer portal that A&M is had in town this weekend is Tony Grimes, former 5-star, number one corner in the country in his class. And he was in College Station this weekend. And very promptly, pretty much announced through a few different places and social media and things like that, he was canceling all the other visits that he had scheduled, including one to USC. And he was canceling all those trips, and he was planning on announcing his commitment where he was transferring to in the next couple of days. That sounds very positive for A&M. It's really tough to say, okay, he visited A&M and then canceled all his other visits, and it didn't go really well for A&M, especially when you consider what the depth chart looks like with all the corners who've entered the transfer portal from A&M. And when you add on to that fact, the fact that he was very close, it came down to A&M and UNC and a couple of other schools for him when he committed originally out of high school a couple of years ago. So it's going to be interesting to watch that. Hopefully we will get some news on that over the course of the next day or two. Other guys, Mason Cobb was in town the latter part of the week, went to USC over the weekend. We will see how that works. A&M feels good about where they are. A lot of folks who are close to the program feel good, and close to Mason in terms of their conversations feel good about where they are there. There's a couple of wide receivers, Trey Harris and Ketron Jackson, who visited A&M as well. Not a lot of news on those. Transfers tend to sort of be that way a lot of times. We will see what sort of news we get out of those guys. Stuff moves fast with the portal. We've seen several A&M guys over the course of the last couple of days. We've seen Chase Lane, Haynes King, and Andre White, all three commit to Georgia Tech in the last week and a half or so. So we're excited for those guys. We're excited to see what A&M is able to do in the transfer portal in terms of bringing guys in. We're going to have a lot of news in terms of recruiting, national signing days coming, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be really great. Keep up with all of it here at Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Joey Ikes. You can find me on Twitter at Joey Ikes. That's going to do it for our show today. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Aggies. You can follow us on YouTube at Locked On Aggies there as well. Make sure you go give us the subscription there. Smash the subscribe button so you get every new video. Hit the notification bell as well so you get notified when we throw up a new video so that you can stay up to date on everything Texas A&M. We're going to keep you going all the way through signing day, all the way through the offseason. And now that you've made Locked On Aggies your first listen, make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today. The Locked On Sports Today podcast brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in about 20 minutes. Peter Bukowski, the host, gets you the analysis and opinions before anyone else with help from our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. And we will see you next time.